Hello and welcome to the new series I'm doing that I guess I'm calling the Red Alert Armory series, which is going to be a sister series to the Tiberium Armory one. Mostly this is because I wanted to start getting into some other universes also. Wanted to make sure I keep my enjoyment level of this as high as possible so I can keep making stuff for the channel. Anyway, today we are looking at the Apocalypse Tank from Red Alert 2 and Red Alert 3. Although we will have to take a brief look at the Mammoth tank from Red Alert 1. Now, I went over this in scant detail when I did the Apocalypse Tank versus Mammoth Tank Space Battles Confrontation video, but the vehicles from the Red Alert series are generally less powerful and less large than their counterparts in the Tiberium series. Also, probably the Generals series. And a big part of this is that each of these weapon systems are only reported as being used with steel armor. While this makes a lot of sense in Red Alert 1, it makes less sense going into Red Alert 2 and especially into Red Alert 3. And this is mainly because explosive reactive armor, a new armor type that would help expand the ability of tanks to react to damage, was invented in real life in the 1970s, which may imply that these more futuristic versions of the Allied nations and the USSR might have access to this new technology, which would change up how the armor systems would work and how long these sorts of vehicles will actually last in battle, and how heavy they would have to be, which of course would affect their top speed, maneuverability, and that sort of thing. Going based off the assumption that they do not have explosive reactive armor, these weapon systems are likely to be a lot weaker than what we see in-game in comparison to some of their more modern interpretations. To begin with, though, the Apocalypse tanks are derived from the Mammoth Mk1 Soviet tank. This tank is described as the largest land-based weapons platform in the world at that time. Now, the largest tank ever built in real life is the Mouse Superheavy tank, built by the Germans for World War II. Now, I'm going to have this up on the screen, but the Mouse weighed 188 tons. It was 10 meters long, 3.7 meters wide, and 3.63 meters tall. It had a crew of 6, 200 millimeters of armor, and one 128 millimeter cannon. These notes about the Mouse are actually pretty important because in the Red Alert universe, Einstein went back and killed Hitler, therefore Germany never happened. So the biggest tank of all time, in this case, the Mammoth tank, might actually be the size of the Mouse, because the Mouse never existed. Now, if we're going to take them as around equal, which seems about right, because all of the renders that we see in-game seem to point the Mammoth as being smaller than the Mammoth from the Renegade games and from the first Command & Conquer game, I'm going to take a lot of these stats as roughly equivalent for the Mammoth tank and going forward for the Apocalypse tank. Now, the Mouse weighed a tremendous amount and could only move at a maximum load at about 12 miles per hour, have an average speed of 11 miles per hour, with an operational range of 99 miles on road and 39 miles off-road. Now, this is not taking into account how many problems that's probably going to have being that weight going through the countryside, blowing off tracks and other things, not even when we're talking about combat. This may or may not be a problem for the Mammoth tank, as the game starts off in 1946, which is years after World War II should have started in the original timeline, which means that the Soviets likely had enough time to build a better engine, giving this thing a little bit better top speed and a little bit better power in general. Setting all those criticisms aside, though, the Mammoth tank was a one-tank army. It was incredibly powerful, 2 120mm cannons, and a 6-rack missile launcher that could attack infantry and aircraft. This thing was built in order to fight any threat it came across. And when properly supported, it was an incredibly dangerous threat indeed. After the Great War, the design was so successful and had such a fear factor that the Soviets retained many of the Mammoth tank's features in the updated version of the Mammoth, the Apocalypse tank. Now, Red Alert 2 happens in the 70s, so we have some further development of the engine of many of the Soviet vehicles, particularly because the Allies were their allies for quite a while, and they might have shared some technology, and or have them stolen from, as the Soviets did in our actual history, take quite a bit of technology from the Allied powers. The Apocalypse tank was a refined version of the Mammoth tank. It sported dual 120mm cannons and Mammoth Tusk surface-to-air missiles, notably taking away the ability to fire these missiles at infantry, which did make it slightly more vulnerable, although these tanks are relatively unlikely to be found unsupported by other tanks or by infantry. It was so powerful and so heavy that it could even run over enemy units, and it was designed so well that it could self-repair to full health outside of combat if you waited long enough. Now, likely what this meant is that the engineers that were a part of the crew could fully repair it to the point where it could be brought back to a repair area and refitted and then sent back out to a larger degree than most tank crews could do at the time, rather than it just magically repairing. Moving on to the Red Alert 3 Apocalypse tank, these vehicles have taken a shift away from the air-land focus towards a straight land-focused battle strategy, with the same cannons, but adding a magnetic harpoon, which can pull lesser vehicles into it, using its massive set of cutting treads to carve tanks into pieces. These tanks, like their predecessors, have the ability to heal over time, thanks to their supply of engineers, but it still lacks a significant degree of speed and is still exceedingly heavy with only steel armor, which makes this very vulnerable to weapons of its time period, especially when you're considering the Guardian tanks or other sorts of vehicles that the Allies would be using, which may in fact have explosive reactive armor on them. Not to mention the particle cannons that they have on some of their stuff. Overall, the Apocalypse tank is an incredible series of vehicles for a World War II or just past World War II period, but it suffers from many of the weaknesses that the post-World War II researcher periods identified. When tanks went through this re-identification, reinvention period into the main battle tank doctrine, a lot of these deadly weaknesses were already known and being developed against. When you get to a game like Red Alert 3, where you're in the 70s and there are two incredibly powerful, very technologically advanced factions, this sort of big, slow vehicle is not very powerful in comparison to the counters that would have been developed by this point, including, but not limited to, advanced missile systems. My opinion would be that this design is actually built with a sort of Soviet Stalin-esque doctrine where the style over substance or the ideals of the dear leader supersede the design choices that might have been better served for this vehicle. Not that that makes a whole lot of difference in the Red Alert universe, as there is basically nothing that you would like to meet less on a battlefield than this massive armor annihilator. At the end here, I would like to thank my viewers for watching these videos, and I hope everybody learned a little bit more about the Apocalypse tank that I talked about in one of my previous videos. I really hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I will start trying to make videos on the Red Alert universe and potentially for other universes also. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a nice day. This is Game Master Karakin signing off.